All right, looks like we have everybody now. So hello, everybody, and welcome. On behalf of BMAC and our partners, the National Research Council Industrial Research Assistance Program, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. My name is Sean DeVries. I'm the Executive Director of the Battery Metals Association of Canada. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Sustainable Battery Value Chain series. Today is the third of 4 webinars covering a wide variety of ESG-related topics. If you missed the previous 2 sessions, I encourage you to check our website where you'll find the recordings and slides. And we want to start by saying we recognize that the application of these requirements that we cover today and in the other webinars really is unique to each organization and your specific operations. And really, in terms of today, we'll see that it depends on the jurisdiction as well. So what's common amongst these requirements is they're really going to impact the entire battery value chain. So our aim for the sessions is to provide you a basis for understanding some of the key requirements and highlighting some of the individuals and organizations operating in this space that can help you better understand their specific application. So also note that BMAC is gathering information on supporting technologies and services that are available to help you meet these requirements. And we're compiling a battery industry directory to highlight those and other solutions for the battery value chain. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to contact us or follow the QR code on the screen and complete the very short online form, pardon me, to get your company and solution added to that directory. So for today, I'm excited to kick off our session covering battery regulations and producer responsibility. So before we get started, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Barrie, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy, and also the Wendat Nation Huron. Of course, I'd like to extend my thanks to NRC IRAP. This technical symposium is made possible by the financial contribution from the mining sector team at the National Research Council Industrial Research Assistance Program. If you'd like to connect with NRC IRAP, please contact Peter Howell, and you can see his email on your screen. So for our presentation today, I'm very pleased to be joined by this excellent panel of speakers. We'll start with Florent Bougain, the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer with Optel Group. And he will be joined by his colleague, Pierre Mauger, Product Manager with Optel Group. And they're going to discuss some of the battery regulations that are emerging internationally and describe how even regional specific regulations, like the EU battery regulation, can have significant impacts on the industry in Canada. That will be followed by Louise Levesque, Senior Policy Director at Electric Mobility Canada, and she'll explain what EPR, or Extended Producer Responsibility, is, and what that could mean for organizations that not only manufacture batteries, but also those that put batteries in the market embedded in other products. And finally, we'll hear from Dennis Neufeld, who is the Program Director for Manitoba, the Electronics Products Recycling Association. Dennis is stepping in for his colleague, Jay Illingworth, today, so I appreciate his last-minute support. And Dennis is going to share some insights on what EPR looks like from the end-of-life perspective and what will need to happen to get batteries back at end of life and recycle them to recover the critical minerals for use in next generation of batteries. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Florent for his presentation. And as he's getting his presentation set up, I'll let you know that you can submit questions throughout and through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And once the presentations are done, we're going to go over as many of those questions as we can get through. So thank you, and Florent, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here on that webinar. It is a pleasure for me to share that session with you. What we will go through the next 20 minutes, it is that agenda. So I will explain you a bit about why Optel is a subject matter expert in that domain. But then we will go across a snapshot of the different global regulations that we have, and yes, a deep dive in Canada and the opportunities and challenges within our country, how to set up such a tool, such a digital product passport solution. And I really want to bring you across real case study and of course across a demo of what can be such a solution. Maybe just to start with a quick words on who we are and our expertise within traceability, because we will talk a lot about supply chain and traceability together. So Uptel has been in business since 35 years, doing traceability for 35 years. And the thing that I really want to mention here, as you may know, we are B Corp, and 100% of our profit is reinvested within our product in order to make our mission a success, which is to save the planet. And how we do that? We do that by bringing transparency onto the supply chain. So for that, we have a software, a traceability platform that has that capacity to capture data all across that supply chain. When we talk about traceability, when we talk about transparency, it is all about the data, and we will have a good talk on that topic. So how to get these primary data? How to get these verified data? So it is the aim of Upchain, and the playground is the supply chain: production, sourcing, logistics, usage, and end of life of a supply chain. And yes, with this data that this type of software can collect, it's the opportunity to value them and to bring transparency, to comply, to increase performances, to engage with consumer. And of course, we will have some these explanation through case studies here. Just in a nutshell, and I will finish here to show to you some of the good benefits of having the transparency and the visibility on supply chain powered by real data. It is, of course, the DPP, the Digital Product Passport, and we will have a good discussion on that. But not just that. You can for sure measure your carbon footprint. You can run life cycle assessment on the top. You have your upstream and downstream visibility and traceability. You can onboard business partners, suppliers inside that journey in order to see, to manage your risk that you may have on your supply chain. Do we want to talk about tariffs risk? Yes, we will. It is another power of that transparency. We want to mitigate the deforestation risk. We want to be sure that we don't have counterfeited products, gray market, diversion in our supply chains. These are these type of values that arise with such a granular visibility. So just to give you a brief view on the different compliance or regulations that are touched, and we will go around that with the traceability. So yes, it's the DPP. Yes, it's in Canada with the Bill S211 that we have, forced and child labor within the supply chain here in Canada, but in Europe, in USA, in Japan, in many different countries, we have such demand requests for many regulations. Oh, sorry. And to make that project and to give birth to a DPP, you need to have a kind of ecosystem with you, because it's not true that one platform will do everything. It's all about collaboration. It's all about interoperability. And you need to bring trust within the data. You need to have, in some cases, third-party auditors, third-party verification. Do you have to audit or verify your self-assessment questionnaire? You may have to go on site to do a field audit, boots on the ground. So it's very important that you understand that the verification is at the heart of getting this primary data, verified data for a good output. But also you need, the machine has a lot of power. Yes, with AI today, we can do a lot of things, but we need human. And because we are going to a value chain transformation, business transformation, and the machine cannot do everything alone. So human has to collaborate to transform the different businesses. And yes, BMAC is here as a huge association in Canada, working closely with Catenax, with GS1, with other associations in the world to make that business a success. And when I mean business, means to get transparency within the supply chain. We need all these actors working together and all the different technology providers. You can see just a brief overview here, but a lot of tech companies are working and need to collaborate across that journey. So we will have a demo and a case study on what is a DPP solution together. But first, let's have a look on the global battery regulations. And if we dive into that evolving landscape, okay, and how do they shape the future of supply chains and sustainability efforts worldwide? First, we can start with Europe. I would say they are leading the path for sure. In the European Union, the regulations are among the most ambitious globally. The European Battery Regulation enforces carbon footprint reporting, life cycle standards, and due diligence. And by 2027, the DPP, the Digital Product Passport, will be mandatory for all EV batteries, providing full traceability and ensuring compliance with ESG goals and other regulations. And additionally, in the Green Deal in Europe, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, will impose tariffs on imports based on their carbon footprint, which affects companies that do not align with strict sustainability standards. And this regulation impacts battery manufacturers, suppliers, and will enforce cleaner production processes and transparent carbon reporting. So key milestones include carbon footprint reporting by 2024, supply chain due diligence by 2025, and increasing requirements for circularity, carbon footprint thresholds after 2027. What about in the States, in the United States? Across, the Atlantic now after Europe, United States has introduced policies like the Inflation Reduction Act, which incentivizes sustainable battery supply chains, and the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the UFLPA, which does focus on traceability to avoid forced labor sourcing. So these regulations in the States emphasize ethical and sustainable practices. In Japan, meanwhile, Japan is enforcing stricter recycle reuse and waste reduction measures under their Circular Economy Act, and which is aligned with the global standards towards more and more circular economy. So I would say that if you look at just these samples, but you have to look at the global trends now, where it does go, I would say that the trends are clear. Carbon footprint reporting is becoming a critical milestone by last year. Okay, recycled content targets for lithium, nickel, cobalt are set for 2030. And supply chain due diligence is becoming a baseline expectation across many different regions. So the DPP, the Digital Product Passport, is a cornerstone for achieving full traceability, ensuring the compliance with these evolving standards. So now let's explore how these global regulations specifically impact Canada and the opportunities they present for our Canadian industries. As we shift our focus to Canada, it's important to understand the dual nature of these global regulations, how they create challenges, but also open doors for innovation and growth. First, into the challenges. Compliance costs are a significant hurdle, yes. And companies need to invest in traceability systems, carbon footprint reporting, recycled content, verification to meet these global standards. It costs a lot. So next is the problem of the data collection and integration, gathering supplier data, aligning it with the international frameworks like the EU battery regulations or CBAM, for instance, can be incredibly complex. There is also the risks or the risk of tariffs, such as CBAM, which could make exports to regions like the EU, more costly and you have to comply with. And I would say lastly, one of the topic of today, managing extended producer responsibility, EPR, adds accountability across life cycle stages, including recycle and waste management. So many different, I would say, challenges. Now, the opportunities. With these challenges come opportunities. Meeting regulatory requirements ensures continued access to key markets like the EU and the US and Japan, for instance, protecting billions in trade. By complying with the carbon reporting and ESG standards, Canadian businesses can mitigate the tariff risks while strengthening trade relationships. And moreover, these positions Canada as a sustainability leader, it is one of our trademark as a Canadian, building on its reputation for low carbon energy and responsible practices. And finally, adopting digital tools like traceability platforms drives innovation. The modernizations of businesses enhances operational efficiency and assures that supply chain transparency, which is, I believe, a key competitive advantages in that global market. In summary, while global battery regulation bring new challenges, of course, they also provide for us, Canadian businesses, a roadmap to innovation, leadership, and resilience. Now, how it does start with Canadian operations? How to start with? And it is a question that I'm receiving a couple of times. First, you need to assess your supply chain. What is the gaps? What are the gaps in traceability and data collection process? Do you have the data? Are the data secured with the right format, the right level of quality? Conduct a supplier mapping exercise to understand these data quality and what are your risks. The second step, it is typically to leverage the technology. So deploying digital platform to get that real-time tracking and these ESG compliances. Use these digital tools to centralize the data, to secure the data, to have that control tower, to make the collaboration again. Collaborate with all the stakeholders. It could be internal stakeholders, but business partners outside of your organization, financial institutions, and then set targets. It's super important to have that capacity to set targets and to do simulation. How can I reach these targets? And yes, based on these KPIs, set in place corrective actions and loop again, measure again. And I would recommend first to pilot and then to scale. So start small, fast, but think big. I will jump here in a case study. And it is a case study with a French gigafactory, so Vercor. Vercor, it's a leading gigafactory in France, committed to ensuring full traceability and sustainability across the EV battery supply chain. However, as all of us, they are facing challenges in reducing these risks, improving the sustainability, and complying with these evolving regulations. And they have also to convince their financial investors, that they are doing good. So the key challenges included achieving end-to-end traceability, ensuring supplier compliance, and aligning with regulatory requirements. So the Vercor's objective was to establish a full transparent supply chain while positioning itself as the leader in the energy transition. It's a key advantage. So to achieve this, Uptel, we partner with Bureau Veritas, which conducts on-site audits, verified supplier data, and these assessments are integrated seamless into Upchain via API automation connections to ensure that real-time monitoring. Upchain provides that centralized portal that tracks supplier sustainability, onboarding, audit scores, traceability processes, the risks, and then support implementation. To do that, Uptel and Verco work together because it's not easy to onboard qualified suppliers with clear compliance goals and then providing that, I would say, unified monitoring platform for real-time decision making. So the benefits, three of them: trusted insights with verified real-time data for better visibility and control, centralized monitoring, a control tower for sustainability and risk management and compliance tracking, and smarter decision. With data-driven tool, you can reduce your carbon footprint, optimize your supply chain efficiency for sure. So I will pause here and I will maybe transfer the mic to my colleague Pierre, our product manager, which will give a demo of what could be such a product. To you, Pierre.
Thank you, Florent. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Excellent. So thank you. Today in this quick demo, I'm going to show you the Uptel supply chain digitization and compliance tool, Upchain. Bear with me. This demo is based on mock-up data as well. So just to make sure that if you see something that looks real, everything is made to show a good view of the data. So we are now, after I've logged in with my corporate account, I'm now on the Upchain landing page. On the right side of your screen, you have different metric cards that will bring value to your company. On the left side, we have different Upchain modules that are possible to purchase. For the battery regulation, what you see on the left is what should be required for you to be able to produce a digital product passport. So for today, for the sake of time, I will focus on specific module. So the first step when you get your Upchain is for the tier 1, for the person, the tier 0, the person who owns Upchain, to upload their supplier and their product within the platform. Once this is done, like it was presented before, you can now start engage with the platform. So, okay, sorry, we got a small delay. I'm presenting, so it's lagging a little bit. So within Upchain, you can do campaign. Why you would do campaign? You would do campaign to discover your supply chain. So asking your tier 1 to invite their own tier 1. So then you would become like you will building that chain. Or once you know them, to fulfill like a ESG policies, SAQ according to the OECD, or other ESG topic, like you could ask them if they are like IRMA, if the mining site is IRMA, you could ask them about carbon footprint, CBAM, you could ask them also about traceability in order to your battery passport. So we have different forms that can be managed to do those campaigns. Once the campaign is ongoing, the platform will equip the user to view how the campaign is progressing, or I am making progress, I am idle, do I need to, let's say, remind some supplier to respond to my campaign. So take all those action, and for let's say a supervisor or director, ask a specific employee to do that job. So once we get the campaign covered, in sake of time, we have all those small and nice, not small, but all those graphics and detailed process about supplier onboarding and SAQ, what happened. So we have made that. So we came to what is my supply chain view. So we provide a global supply chain view, different metric, different supplier status about where they are, how many are in which specific status, their average SAQ score. Then we can jump on different view. Like one of the view is having a graph view of the supply chain when you have done your onboarding campaign. Where do you stand? How deep you went for all of your material? Are you reaching the mining site, or let's say the origin of the material or not? Filtering by country, by risk factor, to help you take your next action and plan it accordingly. Now I know my supplier, but now I want to know more of my supplier. So here we brought, like it was also brought by Flora, we have like for each supplier we can manage status, but most likely we can attribute a risk for them, then that will later on be transferred into a status. What is my next action? How do we attribute the status? So we come up with some public risk indicator, some SAQ scoring that we just talked about. Based on those two, we then create a global maturity score. All of this could be adapted to your company, your view with the ponderation. From there, we provide the risk. So I'll present you one example of a detailed supplier profile. Within that profile, you will discover that we will see traceability, we will see the ESG scoring, we will see other document that is provided that will help build my battery passport later on. So I can have a summary of my supplier, which product is being exchanged in the supply chain, every document and certification that is going on with this company, the risk indicator, the public risk indicator, and their maturity score, all assessment that this company was being part on, every transaction that occurred with them, and the action that as my company is engaged with them. Once I get everything done and sorted with this specific with this company, we have that for the whole supply chain. So then you have understood that we can do traceability campaign. So once I've made my traceability campaign for my battery, I can then later on, I will do like my digital product passport. I will aggregate all this information and bring it into one single document, which is what you can be, this is what you're seeing on your screen. That is the view of the European Commission. So we cover all the topic about the battery composition, the critical mineral or origin obtained via traceability. We support to link, because that's a regulation requirement, that we link with the sustainability report, digital due diligence report, third-party audit. That needs to be linked. Carbon footprint of your product, and also your carbon footprint compared with the EU classes, the documentation that prove your calculation. Circularity, talking about pre-consumer, post-consumer, engaging, forcing that into the supply chain with target for years after 2027. Like all the technical data of that battery, and handling about dismantling, repurposing hazardous material, how to extinguish if that battery catch fire. That is the first step. The last step of this is the in-use battery, that then we look at one specific battery in that production lot, or at the whole lot. Is everything performing according to plan, or underperforming, overperforming? All of those requirements are mandatory for the EU regulation. That's it for me. Louise, I transfer it to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Pierre, Florent, and Louise. I will bring up your slides for you. That was incredible. Some great information there. And now, looking at all those wide requirements, we'll turn it over to Louise to dig into one of those, being EPR.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that first presentation was pretty fascinating. I didn't know if my face was visible on the screen, but I kept on going, yeah, oh, that was really interesting. Thank you. So yeah, I will be more specifically talking about extended producer responsibility today. As Sean mentioned at the beginning, I work for Electric Mobility Canada, and we are an industry association. We have well over 150 member organizations from across Canada and across the electric transportation ecosystem. Next. And in my work, I am the staff lead for most of EMC's different working groups. We have specific groups on different topics, and one of which is the battery working group. Just noting that this battery working group focuses on downstream activities. It's not we stay informed about what's going on in the supply chain and the manufacturing, but our work is mainly focused on downstream activities. And that's why one of our main topics is producer responsibility. There are 25 members on this in this committee, and they come from 15 different organizations. So there are OEMs, we have recycling installations, we have organizations that repurpose, recondition, and reuse batteries aftermarket. There are environmental organizations. We also have fleets, research people, standard organizations, and also other organizations in the world of policy. Next. So what is extended producer responsibility? This is just a quick definition, but it's a policy approach that makes producers responsible for the entire life cycle of their products. Currently, in the EV battery sector, there are no such regulations in place in Canada, but it does exist for other sectors like packaging, electronics, small, those small batteries that we have to bring back at certain pickup points. Yeah, that exists. But there are multiple jurisdictions, including Quebec and BC mainly, that are looking into this. And in the United States, multiple states are discussing or have recently adopted such regulations. I just want to include here that it's important when a jurisdiction is looking into implementing extended producer responsibility to include consultations with industry. And one of the reasons why I picked a visual here from BC is that I did participate in multiple conversations in BC about this, and I especially appreciated how they integrated conversations with industry and the learning opportunity that it was for the regulators to understand every aspect of this of the issues around this. Next. So why do we implement extended producer responsibility? We have the reasons listed here. I'm not going to read all through of them, but of course we want to reduce waste and pollution. And we want to shift the cost to the producers. Doing that will drive eco-friendly innovation. They might want to design products that are easier to reuse or repurpose and also easier to recycle. And that in turn also supports a circular economy. And then the regulation will ensure compliance and accountability. It also ensures that there's like a level playing field in the industry where everybody is working with the same rules. We need to, in the battery sector, these like, it's not waste. We have to look at it. These are very high value content products, and they need to be regulated because of that high value. And also, manufacturing batteries does have a significant impact environmentally. And the longer we keep them in the market and the most efficient recycling that we do, we spread that impact over a longer term, and we recoup some of the negatives from the manufacturing. Next. So in an extended producer responsibility, I spoke briefly about reuse, repurposing, and recycling. So recycling in our vision here is like, it's the final stage, but it's not. It has to come after we have used to the maximum the value of these batteries. So the battery comes out. I'm going to focus mostly on EV batteries, but this could be for other types of large batteries. But it's in a car, and then at some point, we're not using it anymore for that specific car. It could be reused in another car. It could be installed in a conversion, and it could also be used for energy storage. And all of these uses have positive impacts, including maximizing the use of the resource, reducing environmental impacts, supporting the development of energy storage, which can also support renewable energy, and of course, lowering costs when we're in the reuse portion of this. Next. All right, I have a little simple visual here. I did put some, just going to flag the percentages. The first life of the battery, we're looking at 100% of its capacity to about 65 to 60% of its capacity. There's some degradation over time. This could be more or less. I just put them as a general indicator. So that's the original traction battery use for EV batteries in the original car, or reused in, to replace a battery that has been damaged in the same type of vehicle, or in a conversion. It could be, it has been repaired and then reinstalled. So that's the first life. Second life, once it's not as practical anymore as a traction battery because it has lost too much of its capacity, it's still really good for probably, we're kind of learning as we go on this for many, many years. And it has about 65 to 25% of its capacity. Then there's incentive to repurpose it as a energy storage. This could be for homes, it could be for businesses, it could be for renewable energy. And then once that portion is depleted, then we go into end-of-life recycling. And I added here an additional, that's not in the graph there, but the afterlife is where the raw materials after recycling are reused to produce new batteries or other products. Next. So at EMC, the objectives that we're looking for in regulating EV batteries, the management of end of life, is we want to ensure that 100% of large batteries, especially traction batteries, are treated in a responsible way and when they are no longer wanted in the market. So this is really important to like, it's the unwanted batteries. We don't want to force a specific recuperation, like a recovery rate. What we want is 100% of unwanted batteries. Once there's no market for them anymore for the reuse and repurposing, then it goes into recycling. So it doesn't have to be at a specific percentage. If nobody wants it, it's going to recycling. And we want that regulation to include provisions that will promote the circular economy. I put in the graphic that I used here, I put the red X's needed I put there, because I think that nothing of this sector should go into the junkyard. It has to go through refurbishing, second life, and recycling. It's just way too valuable for this to be dumped into a junkyard. Next. So I'm just going to go quickly into a few of the parameters that we want to see. I did mention 100% take back of unwanted batteries. We need to encourage the reuse and repurposing, which includes some mechanism of transfer of responsibility for those batteries. If I reuse it or repurpose it, the original manufacturer is no longer responsible. I become responsible for it. And then there's allow producers to comply individually or collectively. That's really important. Next. And then, of course, battery identification, and that will help the transfer of responsibility, for example. And also reporting so that we can track compliance with the take-back obligation. And I flag here the importance of harmonizing battery identification and reporting obligations with existing regulations in other North American jurisdictions so that industry doesn't have 3, 4, 5, 6 different compliance mechanisms to address. And another element that I want to flag here is that this is a rather new business. It's growing. The EV battery recycling industry, what can EPR regulations do? It can ensure a more predictable supply of end-of-life batteries to recyclers. It also encourages better battery designs, which will make for more efficient and less costly recycling. And I want to flag that there's some need for policy development here. These batteries are sometimes regulated under hazardous waste material, and these regulations vary from one jurisdiction to another. So transportation challenges are very high right now under this. And these batteries need to be regulated securely, of course, but as high value products. Thank you very much. I hope I wasn't too long there.
That was perfect. Thank you, Louise. Lots of great information there. We're going to turn it over to Dennis now to talk a little bit further about EPR and what does it mean on the ground, because I think transport challenges is where Louise left it. I think you can share some great information on that, Dennis, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Sean. I'm just going to share my screen here. There. Okay, thanks very much. And again, Louise, thanks. That was some really good stuff. And one of the things that I take away from your presentation is I can't agree more that when you're starting an EPR program, you must engage with the manufacturers and the retailers. It's the only way that it's going to be a successful program. And again, this presentation was supposed to be done by my colleague based in Ottawa, Jay Illingworth. He's unfortunately under the weather, so I'm going to pinch hit. So I'll apologize in advance if I stumble through any of Jay's presentation. Hope I do it justice here. So EPRA, who are we? So EPRA is Electronic Product Recycling Association, and we operate the electronic recycling program within Canada. We are industry-led. We are a not-for-profit producer responsible organization, or PRO, and we've been operating regulating programs in Canada since 2007. I think our last program that came online was 2014 in New Brunswick, so we're across Canada. I can't express more. We are a compliance agency. We're not advocacy. So in the regulations that are written in Canada, they state that if you sell an item in or into a province, you must belong to a stewardship organization that is tasked with collection and recycling of these items. So we are the avenue of compliance for our retailers in Canada. We call them stewards. We have close to 8,000 stewards, and these stewards are comprised of from the very small retailer like Bob's Electronics in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, to Walmart or Costco. And just an FYI, Walmart, Costco, they total one. Doesn't matter how many locations they have throughout Canada, they are one steward. So whether you're small or large, you all have the same voice at our table. We've collected over 1.3 million tons of electronics. So we've diverted that from landfill and responsibly recycled those in Canada. So that's a number that we're extremely proud of. And we do that over 3,100 sites throughout Canada. So we've talked about this in other presentations, how you get this stuff back. Well, we do it through quite a large network, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. EPRA operates in 9 of the 10 provinces in Canada. The extra one is Alberta, and that is an actual government-run program, but we are in very close contact with them, and we do share best practices with them as well. So Jay is our harmonization director, so he says harmonization is key here, so I'm going to throw him that bone and let him agree. I'll agree with that. So just so if you're in Canada, you'll know this fact, but for the folks who are outside of Canada, Canada is the second largest country by square miles. We have the population, though, of the state of California. So we are extremely large with a very low population density. Maybe a fun fact is Canadian population density, we have 11 people per square mile, whereas the US has 94 people per square mile. So we have a large area to cover, and we must cover that, because the next point is our provincial regulations state that we need to collect in all communities, not just the heavily populated areas. We need to go everywhere. So we've actually been very successful, and we're very good at covering large areas with small amounts of people at a very low cost side as well. So Canada being a federation, we have 10 provinces and 3 territories. That's who's responsible for the regulations. So Canada as a whole doesn't do one blanket. So each province and territory does their own regulations. So they are slightly different. And again, that's where Jay comes in. He has to harmonize all these provinces that do slightly different things, but with the same outcome. We've learned very early that you cannot operate a successful program as a nation in silos. So we do work very close together. We share best practices, and we share our failures. So we make sure that our success stories are scaled across the country. Our program doesn't differentiate between ICI and residential. We have to satisfy the business community, recycling of electronics, as well as the home user. So that's all part of our scope and makes our job just that much tougher. And our program is run by visible eco fees. That's what generates the revenue to keep our program running. So the regulation industry in Canada, there's 3 players in it. The first one would be the call to recycle. Call to recycle operates take back for single use and rechargeable household batteries under 5 kilograms. So that's like the AA, AAA batteries that we all collect in our homes. They've also started to offer new items in the e-mobility and the EV battery section as well. Then we move into the Canadian Battery Association. Those folks look after recycling batteries over 5 kilograms, but not including EV batteries. So they're the wet and dry lead acid batteries for marine and automobile industry. And then the third player in it is us, EPRA, and we're responsible for recycling all of the components within electronics. So that also covers batteries. So we've got batteries in laptops, we've got batteries in cell phones. So what we tell our collection depots is we don't want those folks to remove batteries. We don't collect single-use batteries. But if it's embedded batteries inside electronics, then that becomes our issue and it's our problem, and we deal with them properly. And we also have expanded most recently into e-bikes as well. And then, yeah, collection of batteries in Canada. That's a tough one. As I said before, regulations say if we're operating a program in the province, we just can't pick and choose where we're going to make collections from in heavily populated areas. One of the other facts for folks outside of Canada, 65% of Canadians live within a 1-hour drive of the US border. So that creates a huge space of small amounts of people with a very large amount of territory to cover. So that's pretty much what we do, and we do very well at it. We have to get really creative. I'm located in Manitoba. In Manitoba, we have 63 First Nation communities. 17 of those are not year-round road accessible, so they have to move a lot of goods in and out on winter roads that operate within a 6-week window. So I use ice roads trucking to remove electronics out of some remote communities. Some of my colleagues in BC and in Newfoundland, they use barges to get items out of coastal remote communities. So we've had to get really creative on how we run the program, and we're quite good at it. The next challenge, of course, is transportation with dangerous goods. It was touched on previously. Lithium batteries are considered a Class 9 DG. They require proper handling, they require proper documentation. And again, it's just another item that we need to take into consideration in our collection and transportation chain. The recycling standards and infrastructures, they're uneven, they're different. The standards for processing and the limited processing capacity domestically is a huge challenge. And as well as everybody on this call knows, the varying battery chemistries that we need to deal with make it another challenge as well. And the mass balancing at the end, it's difficult for our processors to separate the embedded batteries from replacement batteries. And we saw in earlier presentations that having to set targets are a real necessity. And so determining the program performance with the challenge of the mass balance is it's another thing that we really need to deal with. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rush everybody through the screens, but that is the electronics EPR program in a nutshell. So I thank you for listening to my and Jay's speech.
Well, that was great. Thanks very much, Dennis. I appreciate you jumping in and taking the lead for us on that. All very interesting presentations. I'm going to welcome all of our speakers back again, and we're going to take some questions here now from the audience. I kind of recorded so many questions on my own, so I want to start with a few, but I kind of don't know where to start. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to get across today is this is actually a pretty complex area. And I think sometimes when we use the term ESG, we simplify this wide variety of things that it covers. And so, Florent, back to you. You talked about and listed out some of the different regulations there, a list of long collaborators that are, part of these programs and making this happen. Can you give any sense of kind of where we're at in terms of that collaboration with different organizations, associations, government? Do you think, because there are some targets in terms of dates of when these things are implemented, what's your sense of kind of how close we are and how the collaboration is working? Are there some gaps there that we need to fill in, and particularly again in Canada, where this might not be right now kind of on top of our agenda, but we need the industry starting to prepare now for what's coming down the road? So can you just kind of speak to that in general?
Yes, thank you for sharing that. Very good question. I think we see everybody expect collaborations. Now, if we look at the real life, we can see many hurdles in collaboration. Just couple of examples, collaborations between tech providers. I was explaining that just one platform fits all will never exist. So it's all about how can I share this data to another software or another platform. This is one of the problem. Why? Because maybe in some cases the data does not exist. I do not have the data for my recycled content. I do not have the data for my carbon footprint. So first it's creating the data. Then even if I have the data, how is it the right quality of data? And then for that, we need standards. We need standards such as the PACT coming from the GHG protocol and the WBCSD for carbon transparency. But we need standards such as Catena-X as well to promote what could be the data set that we share downstream, upstream, the supply chain into the automotive. So just examples. So with standards, then you can mitigate the risk of not having the right format. But even if you have the data, even if you have the right format and quality, I mean, what about the IP, intellectual property? Do I want to share my data to you, my OEM, my downstream, maybe my competitors, my etc.? And the answer is no, because a lot of IP, a supply chain is a big IP for companies. So now you arrive with the concept of, okay, I need to have anonymized data, but I need to be sure that, yes, the data privacy, data ownership, security is well maintained, but I need to have that level of what is the level of transparency or trust that I can bring into an anonymized data. So you see that difficulty as well. And then, yes, you arrive at a moment where businesses can share the data. So data can move from a software to another one, but then it's all about also regulators and even governments, because this is another big actor. And just to give you an example, we are tracing 100% of the Canadian aluminium with our product Opchain. And I can tell you that one of the big hurdle that we got years ago, even if one of the reasons was to fight the tariffs coming from the first Trump administration. But one of the big hurdles was to put together all the big actors. So, in that case, Rio Tinto and all the other one, because they needed to find a common interest of going together to share data. And so, yes, they did a good job, and the Canadian Aluminium Association did a wonderful job, and now it's working. But I can tell you that one of the pain points that we got, all that ecosystem, was not to define the software, but it was to define the why I would share my data. And fighting the tariff is a good way to collaborate all together.
Well, it's interesting that should be your example, because that's one of the very questions that we got. So I'm just going to stay on that for a minute, because as we see a new administration in the US, we see these regulations and this general framework coming on board that talks about traceability and transparency. How do you see this with the new administration? I think you've already touched on it in that it's really driven from the industry side, but is there anything else you want to add there? And do you sense a kind of a risk, I guess, from the administration or change in administration point of view?
What I could say is that, to secure trades between two countries, and let's talk about Canada and the US, whatever commodity it is, it could be a battery, it could be a critical minerals, it could be a piece of wood, whatever. But you need to to be transparent. So Canada needs to show, to demonstrate to the USA, the amount of Canadian volume that it is getting out of the border, to the States. So if Canada is not capable to showcase that, being transparent, of course, on the other side, they would say, how can I mitigate or reduce my tariffs or remove my tariff? And the problem is that how Canada will have evidences that that wood or that battery or that minerals is really Canadian. Because the goal of the tariff, and even if we Canadian would be outside of that because of the negotiations that our government is doing, we need to secure the supply chain, because the United States never wants to have a kind of fake Canadian product, made in China, for instance, getting into the States, stem Canadian, but is not. So you see, it will put pressure a lot on how if I export to the US, how can I be transparent to the US, let's say, border, in order to showcase that my product is the real Canadian homemade product, and the supply chain that I'm using to make my bill of material is under control, is secure, and it's clean. It is that, and the power of, again, traceability, and it's why the Canadian aluminium industry, they understood that, they got that vision. But I think now it's how we can scale that use case, if you want, in other products and commodities. I don't know, Sean, if it does answer your question. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. And going back to your presentation, I think that very much turns that challenge into the opportunity, as you've been talking about, and really creating an opportunity for our industry and making that sought after material, as opposed to some of that other stuff that doesn't meet those same high level ESG and traceability requirements. So I'm going to move on from that now. I want to talk about, and again, there's so many different things in regulations that Florent mentioned, and different aspects to those: carbon tracking, traceability, and downstream due diligence, and things like that. So we're really only pulling out one of those as an example today with EPR. But even within that, we can see some of those complexities. And so, Louise, I wanted to get you to just chat about a little bit about this transfer of responsibility and what that means with regards to EPR, because you said that it's more than just recycling. And sometimes we tend to think of, you use a product, you recycle it, and that's circular, but you've added in so many steps there. So can you talk about that a little bit, and just what that transfer of responsibility refers to?
Yeah, you can have, well, first of all, if you want the OEM to be open to the fact that other companies can reuse their products, they have to be reassured that there will be a transfer of responsibility, because they don't know what that new entity will be doing to their product. Do we dismantle it and use the block cells differently? We configure it differently. There's a different controller, whatever. So we have to ensure that the OEMs will know that there's a transfer of responsibility. If I open up that battery and I repair it or reconfigure it or reuse it in some way, it has to be regulated in a sense that the new battery identification will say, XYZ is the producer of this and will be responsible for the end of life management. So that kind of opens up the door where the OEMs can be a little more flexible about that, because some of them don't like that other people are playing around with their stuff. But it's a good way to ensure that we maximize that second life, and that's part of the circular economy that goes in before the recycling portion of it. So yeah, it's an economics opportunity. It's also innovation opportunity, but it requires those mechanisms for clear and transparent transfer of responsibility.
And essentially, those organizations, then, whether it's a refurbisher or a reuser of that product, they then become responsible for that product as that steward or that manager of it, correct?
Yeah, they become the official producer of that battery. Yes.
Great. Yeah, so we can see that now organizations that may be further down the chain realizing kind of these requirements apply to them as well.
Yeah.
And Dennis, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add one quick little thing. There's an interest from OEMs now in trying to optimize that second life market, because they have that obligations to take back, or they're just doing it on their own right now to take it back. What if there's a second market that I could make money off before I send it to recycling? So that's another extra, plus about encouraging circular economy. Sorry about that.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Glad you added that. But we talked about transfer of power, the producers and who producers are. And I want to turn to Dennis for a second because in your programs, you refer to them as stewards, but you had indicated 8,000 stewards. So this isn't a small group necessarily that we're talking about. And it's not just maybe the gigafactories and things like that. So can you just talk a little bit about kind of, how does this work from a program point of view when you're dealing with so many of those entities?
Yeah, that's a huge part of what we do. There's so much that goes on to the stewards. The stewards or the retailers, they need to, first of all, they're the forward face of our program. And when they sell an item, if there's a visible fee on there, they need to collect fees. They need to submit that fee to us. This data that we're mining from these companies, this is a very sacred information that we hold in there. These are companies that are in competition with each other. We don't share that information with anyone. That's proprietary sales, proprietary information. So yeah, there's some very large players in this field, but there's some very small players, and we need to make sure that each and every one of their voices are heard. Even with the regards to reporting, we go back to like a Bob stereo shop that may sell only a few items compared to like a Costco. We need to make sure that this reporting is a very important part of our process, but that it's not an onerous task on them as well, that they can't be spending all of their time satisfying our paperwork challenges for them. So we've created alternate ways that they can report their sales and remit their funds to the program at maybe less increment, not monthly, maybe it's bi-yearly or yearly, even for the very small, to try and satisfy the really small people, to make sure that they can take part in our program without it being a hindrance with their own business. So yeah, stewards are a huge part of our program.
And numbers are obviously a big thing for you because you talked about collection sites and 3,100 collection sites. Obviously, collecting small products is much different than the larger products. We're talking about batteries here, and you indicate there are several programs currently collecting and recycling batteries of the smaller size, like in electronics. But when we talk about energy storage systems and EV batteries, it's going to cause a much different challenge. So can you give any thoughts on just kind of that collection challenge and just, from a very high level, what you see?
Yeah, collection is always a challenge. In our program, you think to the largest item that we would collect would be, a large screen TV, but it certainly doesn't have the weight or something of a battery. How do we collect those? First and foremost, we make sure that every one of our depots collects these items. We call it undercover and secure. We cannot collect these items outdoors, and that would probably transfer to EV batteries. These items should probably not be out in the elements. There's chances for damage from vandalism, things like that. So we make sure that all of our items are securely stored. And people may say, well, that's impossible to do. We have 3,100 locations that do exactly that. They collect the items, they put them undercover and secure until they're ready for transport. We need to make sure that they're only held at a depot for a short period of time, then moved to a processor. So we don't want to be stockpiling these items throughout Canada, creating potential issues down the road. So yeah, we're good at that, and that's easily a collection network that could be transferable over into the battery sector as well.
Go ahead, Louise.
Yeah, Sean, I'd like to. Yeah, the battery thing, I agree. You can't just leave these lying around. But once you've packaged, because you have to package the batteries in a certain way, you get them on a truck. It's a big truck, and ideally, they're going to go from where they're picked up the first time directly to recycling. Because if you're transporting them to another site and then they have to be re-picked up again, I'm not sure about the efficiency of that. And I've been told that the cost of recycling for EV batteries, 50 to 60% of that cost is transportation. So these things are really big, and they're complicated to transport. There are security measures and yeah, there's a complication there. But I totally agree that this is something that we need to address and think about and see what the most efficient way of doing it is. But having a central place where everything is brought is difficult. Yeah, I don't think it's that easily applicable in the EV battery sphere.
Yeah, and it is true. It's the same with electronics. We collect them. We don't move small amounts of electronics around. That's cost prohibitive. So we collect, like my program, I collect a truckload at a time. So my collection depots are fully accessible by semi-trailers. So again, we've got the capacity for the large trucks. We also collect and palletize these. So we have the infrastructure on site to move, whether it's a skid steer or a forklift, we have that infrastructure built in. So again, those are all things that would be needed with the batteries. And that's, again, what we have in our electronics program. So.
Yeah, that's a great look at some of those collection challenges, because as we move into these larger products, we know there's going to be some other issues, and we didn't even really get into the sites. So thanks for mentioning that, Dennis. But I do recognize as well, there's some challenges, particularly with lithium-ion batteries, and some susceptibility to fire and things like that. So we've got to protect them from damage, and whether that's in storage or in transport as well. So for one other thing that I wanted to go back to you on is, because you mentioned, we started off talking about how this was really related to regulatory requirements that are happening, but there's this pass through. And so this is part of the traceability and the due diligence throughout the whole supply chain. So can you just give some thoughts on where you see that right now in the stages of, what supplier requirements are in addition to what might be happening within these regulations, or do you really see the supplier requirements aligning with what's happening in the regulations now? So, a software or program like yours can really manage that. Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm trying to well catch your question. So could you please, Sean, maybe help me and rephrase a bit?
Yep. I think it's just about whether suppliers are having, customers, pardon me, having their own requirements for suppliers on top of. Are there things that are happening different, or when somebody's really setting up, like with OpChain and a program like that, does it satisfy most of those things?
Okay, thank you. It's better for me. Yes and no, I would say. When the regulation is well defined and deployed, I would say yes. But it is the problem of these regulations. When you see, for instance, the DPP is not launched yet or enforced yet. Why? Because since years, and I think it will take these next 2 years, Europe, in that case, needs to understand how to deploy it, to make it, happening in the real life within the suppliers' hands. So it's an example. The deforestation regulation had gone through that same process. Now, even for that, Europe, they decided to postpone by 1 year. It will be enforced at the end of this year. But it took them, time to deploy a regulation, to understand all these constraints and how a supplier would be capable to share which data to an OEM or to a customer. Now, one of the solution is the tech today. Today, with generative AI and other tools, softwares have that capacity to be a translator, and at very low cost. So what do I mean by that is, if I am a supplier and I receive a demand from my OEM asking me to disclose my carbon footprint, for instance, I will do that. It takes time. Let's say now I'm using a software that will automatize that data capture and do the reporting. But then imagine that if tomorrow I receive another demand, which is again around carbon disclosure, but now it's a kind of PEF, which is required, product environmental footprint. So it asks more than just the carbon. So normally I need to go back again and to redo something and, to have maybe another software, blah, blah, blah. Now imagine that with this AI tool, your unique software with that AI feature can translate what he received from the previous demand, can translate from the different answers that you already shared to your clients during the last month. And from these past data, he's learning and is capable to shape the new disclosure with the new request, which is coming from another regulation, from another clients, etc. So today, what I've just explained as a kind of translator is accessible. 2 years ago, it would be too costly to have such a tool, but today we can do that. So I think here it is how now suppliers, they don't have any excuse not to have the data or not to know the data, because with these type of tools, the data collection, the data sharing, the data learning is accessible.
That's encouraging to hear, because we know it's very complex. So we need to make this as simple as possible, as Dennis had pointed out as well. A question here for Louise and Dennis, and really this is looking at the provincial regulations, and what is the most urgent regulatory reform that we require in Canada for EV batteries? Is it transport? Is it EPR? And how can provinces, territories work together to make this reform and make it work? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to take that one on for starters. The boring answer is both, but I will, add some texture to that. I think the recyclers would say, the ones in the sphere right now would say that the transportation regulation needs to be modernized and harmonized, between regulations at federal and provincial and territorial level. That needs to be looked at. And, I'm not even talking about necessarily it's harmonizing, but also modernizing for this upcoming product that we're going to have more and more, and we need to address this really quickly. The second part of the EPR regulation is really important. We're coming into 10, 15 years now. These EVs, some of them are, the battery is still good, but the cars are coming up to the end of their life. The MHDV batteries will have a shorter traction battery lifespan. And just for public communications, public perception, we need to address this and make sure that we're doing it right, and that we're capturing the maximum value and minimizing the environmental impact of these batteries. So it needs to be addressed as fast as possible, and provinces and territories should be discussing between themselves what type, what their EPR will look at, and of course, consulting with all industry stakeholders to make sure that it is well adapted for everybody, and will have a high level of how do I say, people wanting to be part of that EPR there.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, and I think that it is the chicken and the egg type of question. But personally, I would think it's on the EPR side. But again, I'd have to echo strongly Louise's comment that when EPR is being formed and set up, all the players need to be brought to the table to create proper regulation wording, not to, again, transportation is massive. The transportation people need to be at the table, the same as the manufacturers, to make sure that they're not handcuffed. And you're right, bring it into the modern era. There's some pretty archaic rules out there with regards to dangerous goods transportation that we're running into on a daily basis here with hazardous materials that really need to be addressed. So yeah, I completely agree with Louise on her answer.
So lots of work still to come, obviously. As we're working on this, there's still more to do. Well, I think we're coming to the end here. I want to thank all our speakers, but before we do that, just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything we didn't cover, if there's anything to the audience today, we're going to be sharing this recording and the slides to reiterate some of this information, but maybe just open it up to each of you if you have one last thought. Louise?
Yeah, no, just thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the questions. I loved meeting my fellow panelists here, and I had the opportunity to cover pretty much what I wanted to cover in this session. Thank you again, Sean.
Thank you. Laurent?
Thank you, everyone, for your patience and good questions. Again, we are always available to answer questions if you may have. So, Sean, do not hesitate to share questions if you receive them. It would be I would be more than happy to answer to them. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And Dennis?
Again, just thank you. And if you have any questions, check with the recording. My colleague Jay Illingworth would be happy to answer any questions. He is by far the best source of knowledge within our company for all types of regulatory questions. So please reach out to Jay for any questions you might have on electronic EPR program.
And you're a great stand-in, Dennis, so I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Thanks for joining us. I'll remind you that we do have one last webinar in this series, which is our sustainability disclosures and access to capital. Please join us for that this time next week. And thank you again to everybody for joining us. Please